She yelled, "Go away! Get out of this family, and I hope you freeze to death." Then she slammed the heavy oak door, locking me outside in the middle of a brutal Chicago winter, wearing nothing but my thin cotton nightgown. I stood there shivering barefoot in the snow, staring at the house I had built with my own hands. I was about to grab a brick and smash the window just to survive the night when my elderly neighbor, the woman my daughter-in-law mocked every day, stepped out onto her porch. She wrapped a fur coat around my trembling shoulders and whispered something that changed everything. She said, "My son is their boss. Stay with me, Harrison. By tomorrow morning, he will be begging on his knees. If you have ever sacrificed your entire life for people who turned around and treated you like a burden, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments where you are watching from. It helps me to know I am not alone in this fight." The nightmare did not start with a conversation. It started with the ear-piercing sound of shattering glass. I was sitting in the living room trying to read my newspaper by the dim light of the lamp when my elbow barely grazed the pedestal table. The vase, a gaudy blue thing Brittany had bought online last week, wobbled and fell. It hit the hardwood floor with a crash that sounded like a gunshot in the silent house. Before I could even bend down to pick up the shards, Brittany was there. She didn't walk. She stormed into the room like a hurricane of expensive perfume and fury. She grabbed me by the collar of my pajamas, her acrylic nails digging into my neck. "You clumsy, useless old leech," she screamed, her face twisted into something ugly and unrecognizable. "That was an antique. That was a genuine Venetian glass masterpiece. You did that on purpose, didn't you? You are trying to ruin the feng shui of my home." I tried to speak to tell her that I had seen the sticker on the bottom of that vase just yesterday. Made in China. Price tag $49.99. It wasn't an antique. It was cheap decor she bought to impress her friends on Instagram. But she didn't give me a chance to utter a word. She yanked me upward with a strength I didn't know she possessed. I am 72 years old. My bones aren't what they used to be, but my mind is sharp. I knew exactly what was happening. This wasn't about a $50 vase. This was the excuse she had been waiting for. Brittany dragged me toward the front door. My bare feet slid uselessly against the polished floorboards. I flailed, reaching out to grab onto something, anything to stop this humiliation. My hand closed around the thick, solid frame of the archway leading to the foyer. The wood felt cool and smooth under my palm. White oak. American white oak. Time seemed to slow down as I clung to that wood. Tears welled in my eyes, not from the pain in my shoulder, but from the memory that flooded my mind. 15 years ago, I stood in this exact spot. But back then, there was no floor, no paint, just the raw skeleton of a house. I was the one holding the blueprints. I was the architect. I had spent weeks selecting this specific timber from a mill in Wisconsin. I designed this open concept layout specifically so my son Lucas would have a bright, airy place to raise a family. I remembered the smell of sawdust and the pride in my chest when I handed Lucas the keys on his wedding day. I sold this house, my masterpiece, a property now worth over $2 million to my son, for exactly $1. A gift. The ultimate act of a father's love. And now the house I designed, the walls I erected to protect my family, were being used as a weapon against me. "Let go, old man," Brittany shrieked, prying my fingers off the doorframe one by one. "You are destroying the woodwork. Look at you. You are pathetic. You contribute nothing to this household. You just eat our food, take up space in the basement, and break our valuables. We are done. I am done." I gasped for air as she shoved me backward. I stumbled, my hip slamming against the console table. I looked up, desperate, searching for the one person who could stop this. The one person who owed me everything. "Lucas," I yelled, my voice cracking. "Lucas, please." And there he was. My son. My only child. Lucas was standing at the top of the stairs, looking down at the commotion. He was wearing his cashmere sweater, holding a glass of vintage red wine. the wine I had bought for the cellar 3 years ago. For a second, our eyes locked. I looked at him silently begging. I remembered writing the check for his MBA tuition. $200,000. I remembered telling him, "Son, get the education I never had." I remembered the day I retired and told everyone that my son was a good man who would take care of me. But Lucas didn't rush down the stairs. He didn't yell at his wife to unhand his father. He didn't show a shred of the integrity I thought I had instilled in him. He looked at me, then he looked at his raging wife, and then, with a cowardice that cut deeper than any knife, he looked away. He turned his back to me and took a sip of his wine. "Sorry, Dad." He mumbled, his voice barely audible over Brittany's screaming. "Brittany is really stressed right now. Maybe you should just go to a motel for a while. I can't deal with this tonight." My heart shattered. It wasn't the cold that was about to kill me. It was that. The realization that my son, the boy I had raised, was a spineless man who would watch his father be thrown out like garbage just to avoid an argument with his wife. That moment of hesitation cost me my footing. Brittany gave one final violent shove. "Get out!" she roared. I flew backwards, stumbling over the threshold. The icy wind of Chicago hit me instantly, a physical blow that sucked the breath from my lungs. It was 10 degrees below zero. The air was dry and sharp, biting into my exposed skin. Brittany grabbed my old wool coat from the rack, the only thing of mine she touched, and threw it at my face. She didn't hand it to me. She threw it like you throw a ball to a dog. "Don't come back until you have a check to pay for my vase. Or better yet, don't come back at all." Slam! The sound of the heavy door closing was final. Then came the metallic click of the deadbolt. I stood there on the porch, stunned. I looked down at my feet. I was barefoot. My toes were already turning pink against the frost-covered concrete. I was wearing thin cotton pajamas. I fumbled to put on the coat she had thrown my hands, shaking so uncontrollably that I couldn't even work the buttons. I turned and pounded on the door. "Open up, Lucas. It's freezing. I'm going to die out here." Silence. I moved to the window, peering through the glass. I could see them inside. Brittany was pouring herself a glass of wine, laughing, checking her reflection in the mirror, fixing her hair as if she hadn't just committed a crime. Lucas was sitting on the sofa, scrolling through his phone, completely unbothered. The warmth of the fireplace I had built glowed behind them. It looked like a scene from a holiday card, warm, cozy, affluent. And I was on the other side of the glass, a ghost in my own life. I stepped off the porch into the snow. The cold was agonizing. It felt like 1,000 needles piercing the soles of my feet. I knew I had minutes, maybe less, before frostbite set in. The wind howled, cutting through the thin wool of my coat. I looked down the street. It was empty. Dark. The nearest hotel was 5 miles away. I had no phone, no wallet, no car keys, just the bitter realization that I had given everything to the wrong people. I huddled against the brick wall of the house, trying to shield myself from the wind. My teeth chattered so hard my jaw ached. I thought about the 3 commercial buildings I still owned in downtown Chicago, hidden in a trust fund I hadn't told Lucas about. I thought about the millions of dollars in assets I had quietly accumulated over 40 years of hard work. They thought I was a poor pensioner living on Social Security. They thought I was helpless. I am going to die here. I thought, my vision starting to blur. I am going to freeze to death in the shadow of the house I built. I looked around for a rock, a brick, anything to smash the window. I didn't care about the alarm. Let the police come. At least a jail cell would be warm. I stood shivering in the snow, my eyes fixed on the basement window. It was the only possible point of entry. A heavy landscaping rock sat just a few feet away, half buried in the frost. If I picked it up and smashed the glass, I could crawl inside. I could get to the boiler room. I could survive the night. My hand reached out, trembling violently, fingers numb and blue. But then my hand stopped in midair. I froze not just from the cold, but from a sudden crushing realization. The alarm system. 3 years ago, after a string of break-ins in the neighborhood, I had insisted on upgrading the security. I wrote the check myself for $12,000. It was a state-of-the-art system with motion sensors, glass break detectors, and a direct line to the local police precinct. If I threw that rock, the sirens would scream within seconds. The police would arrive in minutes. And what would they see? An old man in a nightgown breaking into a luxury home owned by a young couple. Lucas and Brittany would tell them I was senile, dangerous, and intruder. I would spend the night in a holding cell or worse, a psychiatric ward. The house I built to keep my family safe had been turned into a fortress to keep me out. I dropped my hand. The hopelessness was heavier than the snow piling up on my shoulders. I was trapped. Psst, Harrison. The voice was barely a whisper cutting through the howling wind. I turned my head slowly, my neck stiff. Standing by the hedge that separated our properties was a figure. It was Martha Higgins. Brittany always rolled her eyes whenever Martha waved, calling her the crazy cat lady who dug through trash. Lucas made fun of her vintage hats. They treated her like an eyesore that lowered their property value. But the woman standing at the fence didn't look like an eyesore. She was wrapped in a thick, luxurious cashmere coat that looked like it cost more than Brittany's car. She held a steaming thermos in gloved hands. Her posture was erect, her eyes sharp and clear under the streetlights. "Don't break the window," she said softly, her voice steady and commanding. "That is exactly what she wants you to do. Come here. The side gate is open." I stumbled toward her, my feet no longer feeling the ground. Martha didn't wait for me to explain. She reached out, grabbed my frozen arm with surprising strength, and guided me quickly up her driveway. We entered through her side door, and the world changed instantly. The silence was the first thing I noticed. The wind stopped howling. Then came the warmth, a gentle enveloping heat that smelled of lavender and expensive cedar wood. Martha helped me out of my wet coat and led me down a hallway. My vision was blurry from the temperature shock, but as my eyes adjusted, I gasped. I am an architect. I know design, I know value, and I knew what I was looking at. The walls of Martha's home were not covered in cheap prints or dust. They were lined with masterpieces. In the hallway alone, I walked past an original oil painting that I was certain was a Dutch master from the 17th century. In the living room above a marble fireplace that roared with a real fire hung a canvas that looked suspiciously like a genuine Rothko. The furniture wasn't second-hand junk. It was mid-century modern teak, impeccably preserved. This wasn't the home of a poor, crazy widow. This was the sanctuary of someone with immense, quiet wealth. Martha sat me down on a velvet sofa and handed me a mug of hot tea. "Drink," she ordered gently. "It has brandy in it. It will help the shock." I took a sip, the liquid burning pleasantly down my throat. I looked at her, bewildered. "Martha, I don't understand." "Brittany said you were—" "Brittany is a fool who judges books by their covers," Martha said, sitting opposite me, with a grace that spoke of high society upbringing. "She thinks because I drive an old Buick and wear vintage clothes that I am destitute. She has no idea." She leaned forward, her expression hardening. "I know what happened tonight, Harrison. I know everything. The walls of these old houses are thick, but the ventilation systems connect in strange ways, acoustically, between the side yards. I have heard her screaming at you for months. I have heard her call you a burden. I have heard her plotting to take your pension checks." I lowered my head, shame burning my cheeks. "You heard all that. I heard enough to know that you are a good man being eaten alive by sharks," she said. But tonight was the last straw. Locking an elderly man out in a freeze. That is not just cruelty, Harrison. That is attempted murder. She stood up and walked to a sideboard, picking up a silver frame. She handed it to me. It was a photo of a man in his 40s, sharp-jawed, wearing a bespoke suit, standing in front of a sleek skyscraper. "Do you know who this is?" she asked. I squinted at the photo. The face was familiar. I had seen him in business journals. I had seen him on the news. "That is Alexander Sterling," I whispered. "The CEO of Sterling Dynamics. The tech conglomerate," my son Martha said simply. I nearly dropped the teacup. "Your son, but—" "Lucas works for Sterling Dynamics. Brittany works for Sterling Dynamics. They talk about him constantly. Brittany is terrified of him. She says he is the toughest boss she has ever had." Martha smiled, a small, dangerous curve of her lips. "Yes. Alexander is very protective of his mother. He hates bullies. And he hates liars. He is flying in from London tonight. He usually stays at his penthouse in the city, but I told him to come here. I told him there is a situation he needs to handle personally. A situation I asked. You, Harrison. You are the situation. Or rather, the injustice done to you is the situation." We sat in silence for a while, the grandfather clock ticking rhythmically in the corner. I started to feel human again. The feeling in my toes returned with a painful, prickling sensation. I looked around this museum of a home, realizing that my neighbors, the people Lucas and Brittany dismissed as irrelevant, were actually the most powerful people in their world. It was a bitter irony. Around midnight, the sound of a heavy engine purring cut through the silence outside. Headlights swept across the living room curtains. "He is here," Martha said, standing up. The front door opened. A gust of cold air followed a man into the hallway. Alexander Sterling looked exactly like his photos, tall, imposing, radiating an aura of authority. He was still wearing his travel suit, his tie loosened. He carried a leather briefcase. "Mother," he called out, his voice deep and weary. "I got your message. What is so He stopped dead in his tracks when he entered the living room and saw me. I was sitting there in my pajamas, wrapped in a blanket, looking like a refugee. But Alexander didn't look at me with pity. He looked at me with recognition. He narrowed his eyes, stepping closer, studying my face. "Wait a minute," he said, pointing a finger at me. "I know you." I tried to stand up, my manners kicking in despite my exhaustion. "Mr. Sterling, I apologize for the intrusion. I am Harrison Bennett. I live next door." Alexander dropped his briefcase on the floor. He didn't shake my hand. He stared at me with wide eyes. "Harrison Bennett, the architect who designed the Millennium Tower in '98, the man who revitalized the entire riverfront district." I nodded slowly. "I retired 15 years ago, but yes, that was me." Alexander turned to his mother, a look of pure shock on his face. "Mother, do you have any idea who this is?" "I studied this man's blueprints in college. He is a legend in urban planning. His work on sustainable structures was 20 years ahead of its time." He turned back to me, looking at my bruised face and my shivering hands. "Mr. Bennett, why are you sitting in my mother's living room in your nightwear in the middle of winter? What happened to you?" Martha stepped forward, placing a hand on her son's arm. "His son Lucas and that wife of his, Brittany, threw him out, Alexander. They locked him in the snow. They called him useless." I saw the change in Alexander's eyes instantly. The admiration shifted into a cold, terrifying rage. His jaw tightened. "Lucas Bennett, the junior analyst in Sector 4. And Brittany, the one in marketing who keeps asking for a raise." "Yes," Martha said. "They are his family." Alexander looked at me, then at the window facing my house. "They work for me," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "They threw a legend out into the snow like garbage." He pulled out his phone. I thought he was going to call the police, or maybe fire them on the spot. But he paused, looking at me. "Mr. Bennett," he said, "I can end their careers tonight. One phone call, and they will never work in this city again. Is that what you want? I looked at the fire. I thought about the cold. I thought about the vas. I thought about the years of insults. No, I said, my voice raspy but firm. Not yet. Getting fired is too easy. They need to understand what they threw away. I want to go back in there. Alexander raised an eyebrow. You want to go back? I want to know why. I said. They didn't just throw me out because of a vase. There was panic in their eyes. They were hiding something. I want to find out what it is, and then I want to destroy them properly. Alexander stared at me for a long moment. Then a slow smile spread across his face. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a shark who just smelled blood in the water. I like your style, Harrison, he said. All right, we play it your way. Tomorrow morning I am not just the CEO. I am your driver. I am going to walk you right back through that front door, and we are going to see exactly what skeletons they are hiding in their closet. He poured himself a glass of brandy and raised it toward me. To family, he said sarcastically, and to the very bad day Lucas and Brittany are about to have. I raised my tea mug. To justice, I whispered. Outside, the snow continued to fall, burying the driveway, burying the secrets in the house next door. But inside, for the first time in a long time, I wasn't just an old man. I was an architect again, and I was drafting the plans for their downfall. The morning sun reflected off the pristine white snow with a blinding intensity that made my eyes water, but the warmth radiating from the black stretch limousine parked in Martha's driveway was a comfort I had never expected to feel again. Alexander held the door open for me, treating me with the deference one might show a head of state, not a bruised old man in a borrowed wool coat. We didn't have far to drive, just 50 feet to the house next door, but the symbolism was deliberate. We were not crawling back. We were arriving. I watched through the tinted glass as we rolled up the driveway I had paved a decade ago. The house looked serene, the picture of suburban perfection. Through the bay window of the dining room, I could see them. Lucas and Brittany were sitting at the table bathed in sunlight. Brittany was laughing, her head thrown back, a forkful of pancakes halfway to her mouth. Lucas was pouring orange juice, looking relaxed, looking relieved. They were celebrating. They thought the problem had resolved itself. They thought I was either frozen in a snowbank or shivering in a homeless shelter downtown. The sight of their happiness turned my stomach, replacing the fear of the previous night with a cold, hard knot of determination. Let's go, Alexander said, his voice low and steady. Remember, Harrison, you are not the victim today. You are the VIP. He helped me out of the car. I leaned on him, feigning a frailty that was only half-acted. My body still ached from the cold and the fall, but my mind was sharpening by the second. We walked up the steps. I didn't reach for my keys. I didn't have them anymore. Alexander pressed the doorbell, a long, assertive ring that demanded attention. Inside, the laughter stopped abruptly. I could imagine the confusion. Who would be visiting at 8 in the morning? The door swung open. Lucas stood there, a napkin still tucked into his collar, an annoyed expression on his face that vanished the instant he saw who was standing on his porch. His face went slack. The blood drained from his skin so fast he looked like a corpse. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He looked at Alexander Sterling, the man whose signature was on his paychecks, the man he feared more than God. And then his eyes slid to me. The horror in his gaze was absolute. Mr. Sterling, Lucas finally choked out, his voice cracking. And Dad. Who is it? Lucas, Brittany called out from the kitchen, her heels clicking on the hardwood as she approached. If it is the neighbors complaining about the noise, again, tell them to. She rounded the corner and froze. The coffee mug in her hand tilted dangerously, sloshing liquid onto the floor. She stared at Alexander, then at me, and I saw the gears in her mind spinning frantically. She was calculating the odds, realizing that the narrative of the crazy old man wouldn't work when the CEO was holding him up. "Good morning, Alexander," said his voice smooth as silk, but with an undercurrent of steel. "I found something of yours. Or rather, someone. Mr. Bennett here was wandering near my mother's property line. He seemed quite distressed. This was the moment. The pivot point. Brittany could double down and scream, or she could pivot. I watched her eyes dart around, looking for an escape. Then the mask slammed into place. Her face crumpled into a performance of exaggerated relief that would have won an award if the audience wasn't so skeptical. "Oh my God, Dad!" she shrieked, rushing forward, but stopping just short of actually touching me. "We have been looking everywhere for you." We were sick with worry. She turned to Alexander, her hands clasped over her chest, tears instantly welling in her eyes. "It is his sleepwalking, Mr. Sterling. It has gotten so bad lately. He just wanders out in the middle of the night. We didn't even hear the door open. We woke up and he was gone. We were about to call the police. It was a lie so bold, so disgusting that I almost admired the speed of it. Sleepwalking. She was painting me as senile as a liability, whilst simultaneously absolving herself of the attempted murder she had committed hours prior. "Is that so?" Alexander asked, his face unreadable. He didn't look at her. He looked at Lucas. "Lucas, your father was wearing nothing but pajamas in sub-zero temperatures. He could have died." Lucas swallowed, hard sweat beading on his forehead. We know, sir. It's a tragedy. We need to secure the locks better. Dad, come inside. You must be freezing." He reached for me, his hand damp and trembling. I flinched, pulling back slightly. Alexander tightened his grip on my shoulder, a silent signal of support. "I am aware that you two are looking for a promotion to the regional director positions," Alexander said casually, as if discussing the weather. "I value employees who can manage their responsibilities. Family is the ultimate responsibility. If a man cannot take care of his own father, the architect who literally built the foundations of this city, I have to wonder if he can take care of my company's assets." The threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Brittany paled. Lucas looked like he might vomit. "We will take care of him," Sir Brittany said quickly, her voice shrill. "We will make sure he is safe. We love him so much," Good Alexander said. "I will be checking in. Personally, Harrison and my mother are dear friends. If I hear that he has wandered off again, or if his health declines due to negligence, I will take it as a personal insult. And I hold grudges, Lucas." Alexander turned to me, his expression softening into genuine respect. "I will see you soon, Harrison. Rest well." He turned and walked back to his limousine without looking back. As the car drove away, the silence in the entryway was deafening. The protection was gone. I was back inside the beast's belly. The moment the limo was out of sight, Brittany's face shifted. The concern vanished, replaced by a cold, venomous hatred. She didn't scream this time. She whispered, which was somehow worse. "You lucky old bastard," she hissed. "You think you are clever getting the boss involved?" I didn't say a word. I just stared at her, letting my silence be my weapon. "Get him downstairs," she ordered Lucas, refusing to look at me. "I don't want to see him. I don't want him in the guest room anymore. He is a security risk. Put him in the basement." Lucas grabbed my arm. There was no gentleness now. He dragged me toward the narrow door under the staircase that led to the lower level. It used to be a finished gym, a place of leisure. But as we descended the stairs, the air grew heavy and damp. It smelled of mildew and neglect. "This is where you stay," Lucas muttered, not meeting my eyes. "It's safer. No windows you can climb out of to embarrass us." He pushed me into the room and turned on the single overhead bulb. The harsh light revealed the truth of my new existence. They had stripped the room. The exercise equipment was gone. In its place was a lumpy twin mattress on the floor and piles of boxes, junk they hadn't bothered to unpack or throw away. It was a storage unit, and I was just another piece of unwanted inventory. Lucas turned to leave, but I stepped toward the corner of the room, drawn by a familiar shape sticking out of a cardboard box. My breath hitched. It was a tube of blueprints. I reached out and pulled them free, unrolling the thick paper on top of a stack of old magazines. It was the 1990 Chicago Riverwalk expansion proposal. My magnum opus, the project that had defined my career, the reason I was respected in this city. I had won 3 national awards for these drawings. They were art. They were history. Now they were covered in coffee stains. Someone had used the back of the drafting paper to test spray paint colors. My legacy, my life's work was being used as scrap paper in a damp basement. I ran my hand over the ruined ink lines. This was how they saw me. Not as the man who built skyscrapers, not as the father who paid for their degrees, but as trash to be stored underground until it rotted away. "Stay here," Lucas said from the doorway, his voice flat. "I'll bring you a sandwich later. Don't come upstairs. If Brittany sees you, I can't stop her." He closed the door. I heard the lock click. It wasn't a normal door lock. It was a deadbolt they must have installed on the exterior recently. They had prepared for this. I was a prisoner. I sat down on the cold mattress, the dampness seeping through my trousers. Despair tried to claw its way into my throat, but I swallowed it down. I looked at the ruined blueprints again. I remembered the man who drew them. That man was brilliant. That man was relentless. That man solved problems that other engineers said were impossible. I was still that man. I reached into the deep pocket of the wool coat I was still wearing. My fingers closed around the object I had retrieved from my stash box in Martha's guest room before leaving. It was an old smartphone screen, cracked battery holding on by a thread, but functional. I had kept it as a backup years ago. I checked the signal. 1 bar. Enough. I crawled to the corner of the room where the ventilation duct ran along the ceiling. The metal grate was loose. I could hear the muffled sounds of Brittany's voice drifting down from the kitchen above. She was on the phone, her voice frantic, angry. I pulled the mattress over to the corner. I slid the phone underneath the edge of the fabric, positioning the microphone toward the vent. I opened the voice recorder app and pressed the red button. The recording time started ticking. 000102. I lay back on the lumpy bed, staring at the unfinished ceiling joists. They thought they had buried me. They thought they had silenced me. But they had just put me in the engine room of their destruction. I closed my eyes and listened. The game had begun. The basement was a tomb of silence, broken only by the rhythmic dripping of a pipe somewhere in the darkness and the frantic beating of my own heart. I lay on the lumpy mattress, staring up at the rusted metal grate of the ventilation shaft. It was my lifeline, my only window into the house above where my captors lived. For hours, there had been nothing but the hum of the refrigerator, but now voices drifted down. They were muffled at first, distorted by the metal ducts, but as the volume rose, the words became razor sharp. "You are a moron, Lucas. An absolute incompetent moron." It was Brittany. Her voice wasn't shrill like it had been when she threw me out. It was low, venomous, trembling with a fear I had never heard in her before. I crawled off the mattress, my joints protesting in the damp cold, and dragged a plastic storage bin under the vent. I climbed up, pressing my ear against the cold steel. I thought it was a sure thing, Lucas whined. His voice sounded thin, on the verge of tears. The guys on the forum said the coin was going to the moon. It was a pump and dump Brittany. I didn't know how much she demanded. "Tell me the exact number before I throw this wine bottle at your head." 500,000, Lucas whispered. But the silence that followed was so loud, I heard it clearly through the floorboards. $500,000, Brittany screamed, then immediately lowered her voice to a harsh hiss. "You lost $500,000. That wasn't our money, Lucas. That was the loan from the sharks your friend introduced us to." That was the down payment for the new Porsche. I gripped the edge of the vent, my knuckles turning white. $500,000. My son hadn't just made a bad investment. He had gambled away a fortune he didn't have. He was playing with fire, and now the house was burning down. They said, "If we don't pay by Friday, they are going to break my legs," Lucas sobbed. "Brittany, what do we do? We are maxed out. The credit cards, the equity line, everything." There was a pause, the sound of pacing footsteps vibrating through the ceiling. Then Brittany spoke, her voice devoid of emotion. "We have to liquidate assets. Fast." "We don't have assets," Lucas cried. "The car is leased. The house is mortgaged to the hilt." "We don't." Brittany corrected him. "But the old man does." My breath hitched in my throat. I knew exactly what was coming. I knew what she was thinking before she even said it. "The watches," she said. "The Patek Philippe collection. He keeps them in the wall safe down there. You told me he has a Nautilus from the 70s and that gold Calatrava. Those alone are worth 200,000, maybe more, on the black market." "No," Lucas stammered. "Brittany, those are his pride and joy. He bought that Nautilus when he won the architectural award for the city library. He promised that watch to me when he died." "Well, he is practically dead now, isn't he?" Brittany snapped. "He is rotting in the basement. He won't notice they are gone. We sell them tomorrow. That covers nearly half the debt. It buys us time." "But I don't know the combination," Lucas said. "He never told me." "I already called a locksmith," she replied, her tone icy and efficient. "He is coming tomorrow at 10 a.m., while the old man is napping. I told him we lost the key to our wine cellar safe. He will drill it open in 5 minutes." I let go of the vent and dropped back onto the mattress, my legs shaking so hard they could barely support my weight. My watches. They weren't just metal and glass. They were milestones. Every time I completed a major skyscraper, every time I reached a pinnacle in my career, I bought a timepiece. They were the tangible proof of my hard work, my legacy intended for a son I thought would appreciate the history. Now they were just a quick cash grab to cover a gambling debt. I looked at the far wall of the basement behind a stack of dusty holiday decorations. There was a false panel there designed to look like an electrical junction box. Behind it sat the safe. I had to act. If I waited until morning, my legacy would be melted down by pawn shops. I scrambled over the piles of junk Lucas had shoved down here. I began tearing through the boxes, desperate, searching for one specific label. I remembered packing it myself 2 years ago when I moved into the guest room. It was a box marked "Office Display." Sweat trickled down my back despite the freezing temperature. I threw aside old tax records, broken lamps, a bag of winter clothes. Finally, I saw it. A battered cardboard box taped shut with yellowing packing tape. I ripped it open. Inside, nestled in bubble wrap, were the decoys. Years ago, after a security scare at my office, I had purchased high-quality replicas of my most valuable watches to display in the glass cabinet in my study, while the real ones stayed in the bank vault or the hidden safe. They looked perfect, from a distance, heavy, shiny, branded correctly. But inside, they were cheap quartz movements worth $50 apiece. I grabbed the handful of fakes. They felt cold and light in my hand compared to the memory of the real ones. I moved to the false panel on the wall. My fingers fumbled with the latch. I pushed it aside, revealing the steel face of the safe. I spun the dial. Right to 19, left to 51, right to 98. The year I was born, the year I started my firm, the year I won my biggest award. Click. The heavy door swung open. Inside, sitting on velvet cushions, gleamed my life's work. The gold of the Patek Philippe Calatrava shone softly in the dim light. The steel of the Nautilus looked indestructible. There were 5 watches in total, a collection worth $250,000. I didn't let myself linger. I grabbed them, stuffing them deep into the pockets of my pajamas. Then, with trembling hands, I placed the replicas onto the velvet cushions. I arranged them carefully, angling them just as I always did. I closed the safe door. I spun the dial. I slid the false panel back into place. But now I had a problem. I had 5 incredibly valuable heavy watches in my pockets. If Brittany or Lucas came down and searched me, which they might given their desperation, they would find them instantly. I needed a hiding place. A place they would never look. A place too dirty for my pristine daughter-in-law to touch. I looked up at the ventilation shaft. I dragged the plastic bin back under the vent. I grabbed a loose nail from a shelf and used it to pry at the screws holding the grate in place. They were old and rusted. One gave way with a screech that sounded like a scream in the quiet basement. I froze, looking at the ceiling, waiting for footsteps. Silence. I worked the grate loose. I reached into the dark, dusty throat of the ductwork. It was filthy, coated in years of grime and cobwebs. Perfect. I took the watches out of my pocket. I didn't have a cloth, so I wrapped them in the only thing I had: a pair of old oil-stained work gloves I found on a shelf. I shoved the bundle deep into the duct, pushing it around the bend until it was invisible from the grate. I replaced the metal cover, pushing the screws back into their holes as best I could with my bare fingers. I jumped down, kicked the plastic bin back to its corner, and threw myself onto the mattress. I pulled the thin blanket up to my chin, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. 3 seconds later, the door at the top of the stairs flew open. Light flooded down the staircase. I squeezed my eyes shut, feigning sleep, forcing my breathing to slow down. I heard the click of heels on the wooden steps. Brittany. She descended slowly like a predator stalking prey. The smell of her expensive perfume overpowered the mildew. I felt her standing over me. I could feel her gaze burning into my skin. She didn't say a word. She kicked the mattress hard right near my shin. I grunted, opening my eyes, pretending to wake up, confused. "What? Who is it?" "Checking to make sure you didn't die." Brittany sneered, her face a mask of disgust. "The locksmith costs extra if there is a corpse in the room." She looked around the basement, her eyes scanning the boxes, the corners, the false panel on the wall. My heart stopped. Had I left the panel crooked? Was there dust on the floor? She walked over to the stack of boxes I had rummaged through. She kicked the open box labeled "Office Display." It was empty now, just bubble wrap. "Junk," she muttered. "Just like you." She turned and walked back to the stairs. "Sleep tight, Harrison. Tomorrow is a big day. We are finally going to get some value out of you." She walked up the stairs and slammed the door, locking the deadbolt with a heavy thud. I let out a breath I had been holding for what felt like an hour. I reached up and touched the spot on the ceiling where my fortune lay hidden in the dust. They were going to drill that safe tomorrow. They were going to find the watches, and they were going to think they had won. But they had just bought themselves a felony. Selling counterfeit goods was a crime. Attempting to sell them to a black market fence, which I knew they would have to do, would put them in a world of trouble I hadn't even orchestrated. I closed my eyes, a grim smile touching my lips in the darkness. "Go ahead, Brittany. Sell the fakes. Dig your hole a little deeper. I'll be right here listening to the shovel hit the dirt." The sound of a high-powered drill grinding against steel echoed through the floorboards above my head, vibrating the dust loose from the basement ceiling. The locksmith was here. Brittany and Lucas were distracted, their eyes undoubtedly fixed on the wall safe where they believed my fortune was waiting to be plucked. It was the diversion I had been praying for. I reached into the inner lining of the wool coat I was using as a blanket. My fingers closed around a cold, smooth object, no larger than a shirt button. Alexander had slipped it into my hand the night before, just before he got into his limousine. A high-definition wireless surveillance camera with a microphone disguised as a simple black button. It was military-grade technology, the kind used in corporate espionage, and now it was my weapon. I knew I only had a few minutes. I pushed the basement door open. It wasn't locked from the outside this time. They were too confident, too focused on the robbery taking place in the living room. I crept up the stairs, my bare feet silent on the wood. I bypassed the living room, hugging the shadows of the hallway, until I reached the door of the home office. This room used to be my study. It was where I drafted the skylines of 3 different cities. Now it was Lucas's domain filled with gaming monitors and unfinished paperwork. I moved quickly to the large ficus plant in the corner, a housewarming gift I had bought them years ago. It had grown tall and leafy, offering the perfect vantage point. I pressed the button camera into the soil, angling the lens through the foliage so it pointed directly at the ergonomic desk chair and the computer screens. I tapped the activation switch on the back. A tiny red light blinked once, then vanished. I didn't linger. I slipped back out into the hallway, hearing the locksmith cheer as the safe door finally popped open upstairs. I scrambled back down to the basement, my heart hammering against my ribs, and locked the door from the inside just as I heard Brittany's triumphant shriek of delight echoing from the living room. She had found the watches. She had taken the bait. I sat on my mattress and pulled out the old smartphone. I opened the secure app Alexander had installed for me. The screen flickered, and then a crystal-clear, wide-angle view of the office upstairs appeared. The audio feed was crisp, picking up the hum of the computer fans. 10 minutes later, the door to the office slammed open. Lucas stumbled into the frame, clutching a bottle of champagne. He looked manic, his face flushed with adrenaline and alcohol. Brittany followed him, slamming the door shut and locking it. She wasn't celebrating. She looked predatory. "Put the bottle down, Lucas," she snapped. "The watches are a stopgap. They cover the interest and buy us a week. But we need real money. We need the big payout." Lucas sank into the desk chair, spinning it nervously. "Brittany, I can't. Alexander is sniffing around. You saw him this morning. He threatened me. If I touch the accounts again, he will know. He suspects you are a bad son, not a thief." Brittany corrected him, leaning over the desk, her hands planted on the surface. "He doesn't know about the back door in the accounting software. You said you wrote the code yourself. You said it was untraceable." I watched on the small screen, my stomach churning. My son, the man I had sent to the best schools, had written code specifically to embezzle from his employer. "It is untraceable for now," Lucas stammered. "But the quarterly audit is coming. If I move the construction funds from the Millennium Park renovation project, the auditors will see the gap." "They won't see it if you invoice it correctly," Brittany hissed. "Create a new vendor. Call it Apex Supply. Bill them for structural steel and concrete. 30,000 here, 50,000 there. Keep it under the radar." Lucas shook his head, his hands trembling as they hovered over the keyboard. "I can't do it. Alexander will kill me. He isn't just a CEO, Brittany. He knows people. Powerful people. I am not doing it." The sound of the slap was so loud, it made me jump in the basement. On the screen, Lucas's head snapped to the side. He held his cheek, looking up at his wife with pure terror. "Do it, you coward!" Brittany screamed, grabbing his hair and yanking his face toward the monitor. "Do you want to lose this house? Do you want to go to jail for the gambling debt? We are already in too deep. There is no going back. Log in. Now." I watched tears blurring my vision as my son, a grown man of 40, typed in his credentials with shaking fingers. I saw the Sterling Dynamics logo appear on the screen. I saw him navigate to the accounts payable ledger. It wasn't just the crime that broke me. It was the memory that crashed into my mind, vivid and painful. I was transported back to a sunny afternoon in May 20 years ago. Lucas was wearing a black graduation gown holding his diploma. He was smiling so full of promise. I had pulled a small velvet box from my pocket. Inside was a Mont Blanc fountain pen, black resin with gold trim. It was the same pen I had used to sign the contracts for my first skyscraper. I had placed it in his hand and closed his fingers around it. I remembered my exact words. I told him Lucas used this to build things, not to destroy them. A man's signature is his bond. Integrity is worth more than gold. Never sign your name to something that won't make you proud when you look in the mirror. And now on the glowing screen of a cracked phone, I watched my son use the skills I had paid for, the intellect I had nurtured, to type fake invoice numbers into a stolen database. He wasn't building anything. He was tearing down the company of the man who had saved me from the cold. He was destroying his own soul for a woman who despised him. I clicked the record button on the app, capturing every keystroke, every sob from Lucas, every cruel command from Brittany. "Okay, it is done," Lucas whispered, slumping back in his chair. I transferred the funds to the Shell account. How much Brittany demanded, checking the screen. $350,000, Lucas said, his voice hollow. "It is from the Foundation reinforcement budget. If they don't catch it, the building could be compromised in a decade. But we will have the money by tomorrow." Brittany smiled, a cold, satisfied expression that made her look like a monster. "Good. Now clean up the browser history. We have a gala to attend tonight, and I need to buy a dress." The feed went dead as they left the room. I sat in the darkness, the silence of the basement returning heavier than before. I wasn't just an observer anymore. I was a witness to a felony. My son was not just a bad husband or an ungrateful child. He was a white-collar criminal who was risking the safety of future buildings to pay for his mistakes. My thumb hovered over the send button on the app. Sending this file would seal his fate. It was the evidence that would put him in handcuffs. It was the end of his career, his freedom, his life as he knew it. I closed my eyes and saw the graduation pen again. I saw the boy he used to be. But then I saw him standing on the stairs, drinking wine while I froze in the snow. I pressed send. A moment later, the phone buzzed. A secure message from Alexander Sterling appeared on the screen. "Data received. Our forensic accountants just flagged a suspicious transfer from the construction hold. Your video confirms the origin. $350,000 confirmed stolen. We have them, Harrison." I stared at the message. The trap was set. The evidence was irrefutable. Tonight at the gala, they would be walking into a lion's den, thinking they were the kings of the jungle. I lay back on the mattress, the grief sitting on my chest like a stone. I had just signed my son's arrest warrant, but as I looked at the ruined blueprints in the corner, I knew I had no choice. Lucas had made his decision when he typed those numbers. Now I had to make mine. Tonight I would wear my old suit. Tonight I would step into the light. And tonight the bill would finally come due. The spinning in my head was getting worse. At first I thought it was just the aftermath of the hypothermia or the stress of living in a damp basement. But this was different. It was a clawing, burning nausea that started in the pit of my stomach and radiated outward to my fingertips. My vision swam in and out of focus, turning the wooden beams of the ceiling into writhing snakes. I sat up on the mattress, clutching my stomach, and tried to remember what I had eaten. Lucas had brought me a bowl of oatmeal early that morning, his eyes avoiding mine as he set the tray on the floor. "Eat up, Dad," he had mumbled. "You need your strength." I had eaten it hungrily, grateful for the warmth. Now, looking at the empty bowl in the corner, a cold chill that had nothing to do with the temperature settled over me. I remembered the texture. It had been overly sweet, masking a slight metallic tang I had dismissed as the taste of the old spoon. A knock at the door upstairs made me flinch. It was lunchtime. Harrison Brittany's voice drifted down sickly sweet. "Lucas is bringing you some soup. We want you nice and full." The door opened and Lucas descended with a steaming mug. He looked pale, his hands shaking slightly as he handed it to me. "Tomato soup," he said. "Brittany made it special." I took the mug. The smell was rich, but underneath the tomato and basil, my nose detected that same faint chemical scent. My architect's brain, trained to notice the smallest structural inconsistencies, screamed a warning. "Thank you, son," I rasped, my voice weak. "Leave it. I will eat in a moment. My stomach is a bit upset." Lucas hesitated, watching me closely. "You have to eat it while it is hot, Dad. It is good for you." I said, "Give me a minute." I snapped, letting a flash of the old authority bleed through. He flinched and retreated up the stairs, locking the door behind him. I didn't drink the soup. Instead, I moved quickly to the small ground-level window high up on the basement wall. It was crusted with dirt on the outside, looking out onto the side yard that bordered Martha's property. Through the grime, I saw a flash of purple. It was Martha's gardening coat. She was out there, braving the cold, pretending to prune her dormant hydrangea bushes near the property line. It was a signal we had agreed upon via text earlier. I climbed up onto a stack of boxes, my head spinning dangerously. I unlatched the window. It was stiff, but I managed to crack it open just an inch. "Martha," I whispered, the cold air hitting my face. She was there instantly, her back to my house, looking like she was inspecting a branch. She didn't turn around. She just reached her hand back toward the window opening. "Do you have it?" she asked softly. I dipped my handkerchief into the mug of soup, soaking the fabric in the red liquid. I squeezed it into a small plastic vial I had found in one of the old junk boxes, an old travel shampoo bottle I had rinsed out. I passed the vial through the crack. "Tomato soup," I whispered, "and the oatmeal from this morning tasted metallic." "I will test it immediately," she said, pocketing the vial. "Alexander has a portable chemical analysis kit in his car. He uses it for corporate security. Wait for my signal." She moved away casually. I closed the window and climbed down, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I poured the soup into a potted plant in the corner of the room, burying the wet soil under some dry dust so it wouldn't look suspicious. Then I sat back on the mattress and waited. 10 minutes later, the cracked smartphone hidden under my pillow buzzed. I pulled it out and stared at the screen. The message from Martha was short, clinical, and terrifying. High concentrations of benzodiazepines. Trace amounts of arsenic. They are not just sedating you, Harrison. They are killing you slowly. The arsenic builds up. It looks like heart failure in elderly patients. I dropped the phone, my hands trembling uncontrollably. This wasn't just greed. This wasn't just abandonment. This was murder. My son and his wife were actively poisoning me. They wanted me dead before I could change my will, before I could cause a scene, before I could expose them. The realization broke something inside me, but it also forged something new. A survival instinct deeper than grief. I heard the heavy thud of footsteps upstairs. Brittany was coming down. I hid the phone instantly. I needed them to believe their plan was working. I needed them to think I was fading, that I was no longer a threat. I lay back on the mattress and let my body go limp. I summoned every ounce of exhaustion, every ache in my joints, and magnified it. I started to shake, letting my jaw slacken. The door opened. Brittany stood at the top of the stairs, silhouetted by the hallway light. "Harrison," she called out, "did you finish your soup?" I let out a low moan, thrashing my legs slightly, as if in a fever dream. The blueprints," I mumbled, slurring my words intentionally. "The steel girders are melting. Lucas, help me." She descended the stairs, the click of her heels echoing like gunshots. She walked over to the empty mug on the floor and smiled. It was a cold, satisfied smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Look at you," she said softly, nudging my leg with her foot. "Completely out of it. The doctor said it would be peaceful, but you look like you are struggling." She leaned down, her face inches from mine. I smelled her expensive wine and the rot of her soul. "Don't worry, Harrison," she whispered. "It won't be long now. A few more bowls of soup, a few more days, and your heart will just stop. Old age is such a tragedy, isn't it?" I squeezed my eyes shut, feigning a spasm. I gasped for air, clutching my chest. "Lucas, I wheezed. Where is my boy? Your boy is busy securing our future, she sneered. Lucas appeared on the stairs behind her. He looked terrified, his face pale in the dim light. Is he okay? He looks bad, Brittany. He looks perfect, Brittany said, standing up and brushing dust off her skirt. He is delirious. The arsenic is doing its job on his system, and the sedatives are keeping him quiet. He won't be able to speak coherently to anyone even if he wanted to. She turned to Lucas, her eyes gleaming with triumph. Call Gary, she commanded. Tell him to bring the inheritance papers and the power of attorney forms tonight. He is weak enough now. We can guide his hand to sign anything. And if he dies before the gala is over, we need to make sure everything is already in our name. But he is my dad. Lucas whispered, his voice trembling. He looks like he is in pain. He is a paycheck, Lucas, Brittany snapped. Focus. Do you want to go to jail for the embezzlement? Do you want to lose the house? This is the only way out. He dies. We inherit the rest of his assets. We pay off the debt, and we live happily ever after. Now stop being a coward and go call the lawyer. Lucas looked at me one last time. I saw a flicker of hesitation, a ghost of the son I once knew. I let out a pained whimper, waiting for him to rush to my side to call an ambulance to do the right thing. But he didn't. He looked at his wife, nodded slowly, and turned away. Okay, he said softly. I'll call Gary. Just make it quick, Brittany. I don't want him to suffer too long. Just a few more days, she promised, patting Lucas on the cheek. By the weekend he will be gone and we will be free. They walked up the stairs together, leaving me in the dark. The door clicked shut. I opened my eyes in the silence. The tears that rolled down my cheeks were real this time. They were hot and bitter. My son had just agreed to euthanize me like a sick dog. He had signed my death warrant to save his own skin. I wiped my face with the sleeve of my pajamas. The sadness evaporated, replaced by a cold, diamond-hard resolve. They thought I was dying. They thought I was weak. But they had forgotten one thing. You never demolish a building until you are sure the foundation is gone. And my foundation was made of sterner stuff than they could ever imagine. I reached for the phone again. I had to get out. I had to meet Sarah. And tonight at the gala, I wasn't just going to crash their party. I was going to bury them. The sound of the garage door rumbling shut and the fading purr of Brittany's Range Rover was the signal I had been praying for. She was heading to her weekly spa appointment, a $400 indulgence paid for with money she had stolen from my company. Lucas had left for the office an hour earlier, his head hung low, looking like a man walking to the gallows. For the first time in 48 hours, the house was empty. I wasted no time. I dragged the plastic bin over to the high window on the north wall of the basement. My body screamed in protest. The trace amounts of arsenic were already doing their work, making my limbs feel like they were filled with lead. But adrenaline is a powerful antidote. I climbed onto the bin, my face level with the grime-encrusted glass. Alexander had promised to help, and as always, he had delivered. I pushed against the iron security bars that covered the window well from the outside. To the naked eye, they looked solid, rusted into the concrete foundation. But as I applied pressure, the entire grate shifted. Alexander's security team must have come during the night, silent as ghosts, and used hydraulic cutters to slice through the bolts, then placed the grate back so it looked undisturbed. I pushed the glass pane open. It groaned on its hinges. I shoved the iron bars aside. They moved with a heavy scrape against the cement. I pulled myself up. It was an agonizing struggle. My shoulders burned, and my breath came in short, ragged gasps. I scraped my elbows raw against the rough concrete ledge, but I didn't stop. I hauled my 72-year-old body out of that dungeon inch by inch until I flopped onto the snow-covered mulch of the side yard. The cold air hit me like a slap, waking up my senses. I lay there for a moment, staring at the gray Chicago sky, breathing in freedom. Then I scrambled to my feet. A nondescript gray sedan was waiting at the end of the alley, just as Martha had promised. The driver didn't ask questions. He simply opened the back door, and the moment I slid onto the leather seat, he drove. 20 minutes later, I walked into the law offices of Jenkins and Associates. The receptionist looked up, her eyes widening at my appearance. I was wearing my old wrinkled suit, my shoes were scuffed, and I looked like a man who hadn't slept in a week. But before she could ask me to leave, the double doors at the end of the hall flew open. Sarah Jenkins stood there. She was one of the toughest corporate attorneys in the city, a woman I had trusted for 30 years. She didn't look at my clothes. She looked at my eyes. "Harrison," she said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Get in here." I walked into her office and she closed the door, locking it. She guided me to a chair and poured a glass of water. "I received the files from Alexander this morning," she said, sitting behind her massive oak desk. "The embezzlement evidence, the toxicology report. Harrison, we have enough to put them away for 20 years. Why are you here? You should be in a hospital." I took a sip of water, my hand shaking slightly. "I will go to the hospital later, Aunt Sarah. Right now, I have business to conclude. Open the Bennett Holdings file." Sarah hesitated, then reached into her secure drawer and pulled out a thick, leather-bound portfolio. She placed it on the desk and opened it. The contents of that file were the best-kept secret of my life. Lucas and Brittany thought I was living off a modest pension and Social Security. They thought the house I sold them for $1 was my only significant asset. They had no idea. Sarah spread the documents out. 3 commercial skyscrapers in downtown Chicago. A diversified portfolio of blue-chip stocks accumulated over 40 years of market growth. Municipal bonds. Offshore trusts. The total valuation at the bottom of the balance sheet read $15,400,000. I looked at the number. It didn't make me feel rich. It made me feel like a failure. "Why did you hide it?" Harrison Sarah asked softly, echoing the question that had haunted me for years. "You could have lived in a penthouse. You could have hired nurses. You didn't have to live in their basement." "I did it for him," I whispered, staring at the deed to a building on Wacker Drive. "I wanted Lucas to build his own life. I wanted him to have the hunger I had. I thought if he knew about the money, he would become lazy. He would become entitled." I let out a bitter laugh. "I was a fool, Sarah. He became entitled anyway. He became a thief because he thought he was poor, and now he is going to become a prisoner because he tried to steal what he thought I didn't have." I sat up straighter, pushing the regret aside. It was time to stop being a father and start being a businessman. "What is the status of the mortgage on Lucas's house?" I asked. Sarah tapped her keyboard, pulling up a real estate database. "It is in pre-foreclosure," she said grimly. "They haven't paid the mortgage in 4 months. The bank has already issued a notice of default. They are drowning Harrison. The bank is looking to offload the toxic debt before the end of the fiscal quarter. They want to sell the note to a collection agency for pennies on the dollar, just to clear the books." "Perfect," I said. "Buy it." Sarah stopped typing. She looked at me over her glasses. "Excuse me, I want Bennett Holdings to purchase the mortgage note from the bank." I said, my voice steady. "Buy the debt. Buy the arrears. Buy the entire lien on the property. Use the shell company so my name doesn't appear on the paperwork yet." Harrison Sarah said slowly. "If you buy the note, you become the lender. You become the bank. You will hold the deed to the house they kicked you out of." "Exactly," I said. "And since they are in default as the new lien holder, I will have the right to accelerate the loan. I can demand full payment of the entire principal immediately." "And when they can't pay?" Sarah asked, already knowing the answer. "Then I foreclose," I said. "I take the house. I take the asset. Sarah looked at me with a mixture of fear and admiration. It was a ruthless maneuver. It was the kind of move a corporate shark makes to swallow a competitor. It wasn't something a father usually does to his son. But Lucas wasn't my son anymore. He was the man who fed me poison soup. "Do it," I commanded. "Wire the funds today. I want the papers signed and legal by 5 p.m. Sarah nodded, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She printed a document and slid it across the desk. It was the purchase order for the debt. I picked up the heavy Mont Blanc pen from her desk. The weight of it felt familiar. I signed my name at the bottom. Harrison Bennett, Director, Bennett Holdings. With that signature, I owned them. I owned the roof over their heads. I owned the floor they walked on. They were living in my house, plotting my death, unaware that their victim had just become their executioner. I stood up. My time was running out. "Thank you, Sarah," I said. "I will see you at the gala tonight. Bring the foreclosure papers. And bring the police." I left the office and the gray sedan raced me back to the suburbs. We arrived at the alley behind the house just as the clock struck 11. Brittany's spa appointment usually lasted 2 hours. She would be back any minute. I scrambled back through the window well. The climb down was terrifying. I slipped halfway, scraping my shin against the iron bars, biting my tongue to keep from crying out. I landed on the pile of boxes with a muffled thud. I quickly pulled the iron grate back into position, ensuring it looked undisturbed from the outside. I closed the glass window and smeared dust over the latch to hide my fingerprints. I dragged the plastic bin back to its corner. I collapsed onto the mattress, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I was sweating, breathless, my hands shaking uncontrollably. 2 minutes later, I heard the rumble of the garage door opening. Brittany was home. I pulled the blanket up to my chin. I let my mouth hang open. I unfocused my eyes. I forced my body to go limp, channeling the effects of the poison I hadn't taken. The door at the top of the stairs opened. Brittany's heels clicked on the wood. She didn't come down. She just opened the door to check on her prisoner. "Still alive down there, Harrison," she called out, her voice cheerful and cruel. I let out a weak, garbled moan. "Good," she said. "Rest up. We have a big night ahead of us. You need to look presentable for your final performance." She closed the door and locked it. I lay in the dark, a cold smile spreading across my face. She had no idea. She thought she was preparing me for my funeral, but she had just invited the Grim Reaper to her own party. The basement door groaned open, spilling a slice of yellow hallway light across the damp concrete floor. It was evening, perhaps 8 or 9 o'clock, though time had become a fluid, slippery thing in the darkness of my imprisonment. I heard 3 sets of footsteps descending the stairs. 2 I knew intimately. The heavy, reluctant tread of my son Lucas, and the sharp, aggressive click of Brittany's heels. But there was a 3rd set, a scuffling, impatient sound of cheap leather shoes dragging on wood. I pulled the thin blanket tighter around my shoulders, my heart hammering against my ribs. I had been waiting for this. I knew the poison wasn't working fast enough for them. They needed legal authority before I died, not after. Brittany reached the bottom of the stairs first. She flipped the switch, and the single overhead bulb flared to life, blinding me momentarily. As my eyes adjusted, I saw them. Brittany looked manic, her eyes wide and feverish. Lucas looked pale, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, refusing to look at the mattress where his father lay. And then there was the stranger. He was a short, sweaty man in an ill-fitting gray suit that had seen better decades. He carried a battered briefcase and smelled of stale cigarette smoke and desperation. He looked around the basement with a sneer, wrinkling his nose at the smell of mildew, but he didn't look surprised. This was a man who dwelled in the sewers of the legal system. "Wake up, Harrison." Brittany said, her voice sharp and devoid of the fake sweetness she had used earlier. "We have a visitor. This is Gary. He is a lawyer." He is here to help you. Help me, I croaked, forcing my voice to sound weaker than it was. I let my head loll to the side, my mouth hanging slightly open. Yes, to help you manage your affairs, Gary said, stepping forward. He didn't introduce himself properly or offer a hand. He just opened his briefcase on top of a stack of cardboard boxes and pulled out a thick document stapled in blue paper. We understand your health is declining rapidly, Mr. Bennett. Gary said, his voice a rapid, oily mumble. Your son and daughter-in-law are very concerned. To ensure your medical treatment is paid for and your assets are protected, we need to execute a durable power of attorney immediately. I squinted at the document. Even from the floor, I could see the bold letters at the top. It granted Lucas and Brittany total, unrestricted control over everything. My bank accounts, my properties, my medical decisions, even the right to cease life support. It was a death warrant disguised as legal aid. I don't want to sign, I whispered, trying to pull my hand away, as Gary thrust a pen toward me. You have to sign. Dad, Lucas said, finally speaking. His voice was tight, strained. It is for your own good. You are not thinking clearly. The doctors say you have dementia. Dementia. That was their angle. I looked at my son. Lucas, please. Don't do this. I am your father. Lucas flinched, but Brittany stepped in, blocking my view of him. She grabbed my wrist, her fingernails digging into my skin. Enough of the drama, she hissed. We don't have time for this. The gala is in 2 hours. We need this filed tonight. Sign the damn paper, Harrison. I clenched my fist, refusing to take the pen. No. Brittany's face twisted into a mask of pure rage. She looked at Lucas. Hold him down. Lucas hesitated. Brittany, maybe we can. I said hold him down, she screamed. Do you want the loan sharks to break your legs tomorrow? Do you want to lose everything? Grab his arm. Lucas moved. He walked over to the mattress and knelt beside me. He smelled of fear and expensive cologne. He placed his hands on my shoulders. I looked into his eyes, searching for any trace of the boy I had raised, the boy I had taught to ride a bike, the boy I had bailed out time and time again. I saw nothing but cowardice. Sorry, Dad, he whispered. He put his weight on me, pinning my shoulders to the mattress. I struggled, but I was 72 years old and weakened by cold and stress. He was 40 and desperate. He held me fast. Brittany grabbed my right hand. She forced my fingers open and jammed the pen into my grip. She wrapped her hand around mine, squeezing so hard my knuckles ground together. Gary, bring the clipboard, she ordered. The lawyer stepped forward, holding the document steady in front of my face. Just make an X if he can't write his name, Gary said, his eyes darting around the room nervously. It counts. I will witness it. I felt the pen touching the paper. Brittany was moving my hand, forcing the ink to flow. I had to act. I couldn't sign. If I signed even under duress, it would complicate everything. It would give them legal cover to empty the accounts before Sarah could intervene. I needed to create chaos. Earlier that afternoon, while rummaging through the boxes of old junk, I had found a forgotten stash of protein powder samples from when Lucas went through a bodybuilding phase years ago. I had pocketed a packet of Vanilla Whey. Just before they came down the stairs, I had poured a handful of the dry powder into my mouth, holding it there, letting it mix with my saliva into a thick, frothy paste. Now, as the pen scratched against the paper, I unleashed my performance. I let out a gargled, choking sound. I arched my back, bucking against Lucas's grip. What is he doing? Lucas yelled, his grip slipping. Hold him still, Brittany shrieked. I started to convulse. I shook my head violently, letting my jaw go slack. The mixture of saliva and white protein powder bubbled up, spilling out of the corners of my mouth. It looked exactly like a toxic reaction, like foam, like death. I gagged, forcing a retching cough, and sprayed the white frothy liquid all over the front of Gary's cheap gray suit. He is seizing, Lucas screamed, scrambling backward, wiping the foam from his hand. Oh God. He is dying, the poison was too much. Gary looked down at his suit, then at me. I was thrashing on the mattress. Eyes rolled back, white foam bubbling from my lips, making horrible, choking noises. He is dying, Gary yelped, his voice cracking. You said he was just senile. You didn't say he was dying. He is fine, Brittany yelled, trying to grab my hand again, though she looked terrified. It is just a fit, sign the paper. I let out a long, rattling wheeze and went limp, staring unseeingly at the ceiling, letting the foam pool on my chin. I am not part of this, Gary shouted. He threw the clipboard onto the floor. I am not catching a manslaughter charge for a few $1,000. You people are crazy. He turned and ran. He didn't walk. He sprinted up the stairs, his briefcase banging against his legs. We heard the front door slam seconds later. The silence that followed was heavy and terrifying. I lay still, shallow breathing, keeping my eyes fixed on the ceiling. Lucas was hyperventilating in the corner. He is dead. We killed him. We are going to prison, Brittany. Shut up, Brittany screamed. She leaned over me. She put her hand on my chest. She felt my heart beating. It was racing, drumming a frantic rhythm. He is not dead, you idiot, she spat at Lucas. He is faking, or he is just sick, but he is alive. She looked at the unsigned document on the floor, now splattered with the white foam. Her plan was ruined. The lawyer was gone. The authority was unsigned. She stood up, her chest heaving with fury. She looked down at me, her eyes filled with a hatred so pure it was almost blinding. You useless old man, she whispered. Then she pulled her leg back and kicked me. It wasn't a warning tap. She drove the pointed toe of her designer heel straight into my ribs. Pain exploded in my side. I couldn't help it. I grunted, curling into a ball to protect myself. I hate you, she screamed, kicking me again, this time in the thigh. You ruin everything. Why won't you just die? Why won't you just let us have the money? She raised her foot for a third kick, aiming for my head. Brittany, stop! Lucas lunged forward. He grabbed his wife around the waist and hauled her back. She struggled, flailing, trying to claw at me. We can't leave marks, Lucas yelled, wrestling her toward the stairs. If he has bruises, the coroner will know. Stop it! He dragged her up the first 2 steps. Brittany stopped fighting, sagging against the railing, sobbing in frustration. Lucas looked back down at me. I was curled on the mattress, clutching my side, wiping the white foam from my mouth. Our eyes met. I expected to see apology. I expected to see shame for the fact that his wife had just assaulted his father while he watched. But I didn't see that. Lucas looked at me with cold, hard resentment. His eyes were dark voids. He didn't hate me because I was hurt. He hated me because I was difficult. He hated me because I wasn't making his crime easy. Just stay there, he said, his voice flat and dead. Just stay there and wait. He turned and pushed Brittany up the stairs. We don't need the paper, I heard him say as they ascended. We will just do it the hard way. If he is gone by the time we get back from the gala, we will forge the signature ourselves. The door slammed shut. The lock clicked. I lay in the dark, gasping for air, my ribs throbbing with a sharp, hot pain. I touched my side. It wasn't broken, but it would bruise. Good. Let there be bruises. Let there be evidence. I spat the last of the protein paste onto the floor. They were going to the gala. They were going to celebrate their promotion. They thought I was beaten. I sat up, wincing. I dragged myself to my feet. It was time. I moved to the corner where I had hidden my only remaining asset. A garment bag taped to the back of the furnace where they hadn't looked. Inside was my tuxedo. It was 20 years old, a little moth-eaten, but it was a bespoke suit from Savile Row. I stripped off the filthy pajamas. I wiped my face with a rag and some water from a bottle I had stashed. I dressed in the dark. The shirt was loose around my neck. I had lost so much weight, but the jacket still fit my shoulders. I tied the bow tie by feel my fingers remembering the knot from 1,000 black tie events in my past life. I put on my shoes. I slicked back my hair. I wasn't the victim in the basement anymore. I was Harrison Bennett. I was the man who built the skyline. I checked my watch, the cheap plastic one I wore, not the Patex hidden in the vent. Alexander's car would be in the alley in 10 minutes. I walked to the window well. I was ready. The coercion had failed. Now it was time for the consequences. The vibrations of the cell phone hidden beneath my mattress buzzed against my leg, startling me from my preparations. I had just reached for my garment bag, ready to don the armor of my old tuxedo, but I froze. The screen of the cracked smartphone lit up with a notification from the surveillance app. Audio feed active. Upstairs in the kitchen, a phone was ringing. It wasn't the shrill, demanding ring of a debt collector. It was the melodic, insistent chime of a priority contact. I sat back down on the damp mattress, pulling the device closer. I needed to know the battlefield conditions before I made my move. Lucas picked up on the second ring. Hello, his voice was a tremble of nerves, expecting the police or perhaps the loan sharks coming to collect on his gambling debt. Lucas, this is Alexander Sterling. The voice coming through the tiny speaker was rich, commanding, and utterly terrifying to my son. I could hear Lucas gasp, the sound of a drowning man suddenly finding air. Mr. Sterling. Lucas stammered. Sir, I didn't expect a call so late. Is there a problem with the accounts? There was a pause, a masterful silence that Alexander held just long enough to let Lucas sweat. On the contrary, Alexander said, his tone shifting to a warm, enthusiastic purr. I have been reviewing the quarterly financial reports you submitted this morning. The consolidation of the construction funds, the efficiency of the vendor payments. It is remarkable work, Lucas. Truly visionary. I closed my eyes, shaking my head in the dark. Visionary. It was theft. It was embezzlement disguised as accounting, and Alexander knew it. He was reeling him in. Thank you, sir, Lucas breathed, his relief palpable even through the digital feed. I wanted to streamline the process. You have done more than that, Alexander continued. You have shown executive potential. I am looking for a new regional chief financial officer. Someone young, hungry, willing to take risks. I think I have found him. I heard a crash upstairs, likely Brittany dropping a glass or hitting the table in her excitement. Are you offering me the promotion? Lucas asked, his voice squeaking. I am, Alexander said, but I want to do it properly. We are hosting the annual Heritage Gala tonight at the Ritz-Carlton. It is a last-minute addition to the schedule, very exclusive. I want to announce your appointment there in front of the board, in front of the city's elite. Oh my God, I heard Brittany whisper in the background. We are rich. We are saved. There is just one condition, Lucas Alexander added, his voice dropping slightly, becoming more intimate. I was looking through your personnel file. I saw your father's name, Harrison Bennett. Yes, Lucas said, the fear creeping back in. Harrison Bennett was a legend in this city, Alexander said. He was a mentor to my late father. I had no idea he was living with you. It would be a profound honor for me to shake his hand tonight. Bring him with you. I want to honor the past while we celebrate the future. The silence that followed was heavy. I knew exactly what they were thinking. They were thinking about the man in the basement, the man they had starved, the man they had poisoned, the man whose ribs were currently throbbing from Brittany's designer heels. Sir Lucas stammered. My father, he is not well. He is very frail. I don't know if he can handle a gala. Nonsense, Alexander boomed. If he can stand, he can come. Put him in a wheelchair if you have to. But I insist. It would mean a great deal to me personally. And Lucas, I don't like being disappointed. I will bring him, Lucas said quickly. We will be there. 7 o'clock. Thank you, sir, thank you. The call ended. For a moment, there was silence upstairs. Then a scream of pure, unadulterated joy erupted. We did it, Brittany shrieked. CFO. Do you know what the salary is? It is $500,000 a year, plus bonuses. We can pay off the sharks. We can fix the accounts before the audit next month. We are untouchable. But what about Dad? Lucas asked, his voice cutting through her hysteria. Brittany, he looks like a corpse. He has foam on his face. You kicked him. We can't take him to the Ritz. We have to. Brittany snapped. You heard the boss. No dad, no promotion. She began pacing. I could hear the rapid click of her heels. Okay, here is the plan. We clean him up. We pump him full of caffeine and makeup. We put him in a suit. We wheel him in, park him in a dark corner, let Alexander shake his hand, and then we ignore him. If he tries to talk, we say it is the dementia. We say he babbles. Nobody listens to old men anyway. Go get him, she ordered. Get him into the shower. Scrub the filth off him. I will find a suit that fits. I quickly shoved the garment bag with my tuxedo back behind the furnace. I couldn't let them see it. If they saw I was prepared, they would know I was lucid. They would know I was plotting. I had to be the doll they wanted to play with. I had to be the victim one last time. I lay back on the mattress, slowing my breathing, letting my limbs go heavy. The door flew open. Get up, Lucas yelled, rushing down the stairs. He didn't look guilty anymore. He looked frantic, energized by greed. He grabbed my arm and hauled me up. I groaned, feigning weakness, letting my legs buckle. Come on, Dad, wake up. You are going to a party. You are going to make me rich. They dragged me up the stairs, out of the darkness, and into the blinding light of the hallway. The house smelled of lavender and money, a sharp contrast to the rot of the basement. They shoved me into the guest bathroom, the one I used to clean myself. Brittany was there, holding a sponge and a bottle of industrial-strength body wash. Her eyes were wild. Strip him, she told Lucas. The next hour was a blur of humiliation. They scrubbed me with rough hands, washing away the basement grime but leaving the bruises. They didn't care about my dignity. They discussed the color of the new Mercedes they would buy while they washed their father's back. Look at this bruise, Lucas whispered, pointing to my side. It is turning purple. Cover it with an undershirt, Brittany snapped. Nobody is going to see his ribs at the Ritz. Just make sure his face looks alive. They shaved me. Brittany applied concealer to the dark circles under my eyes, her touch cold and clinical. She combed my hair, slicking it back with Lucas's expensive gel. Then came the clothes. They didn't find my tuxedo. Instead, Lucas brought out an old, moth-eaten gray suit from the back of the closet, one I had worn to funerals 10 years ago. It smelled of cedar and age. They dressed me like a mannequin. I stood there limp, letting them button the shirt, letting them tie the tie. I stared at the wall, my mind a fortress of silence. When they were finished, Brittany stepped back to evaluate her handiwork. He looks thin, she muttered. The suit is hanging off him. He lost 10 pounds in 3 days. Stuff a sweater underneath, Lucas suggested. No time, Brittany said. It will have to do, he looks frail. It sells the dementia story. She walked up to me, grabbing my face in her hands. Her nails dug into my cheeks. She forced me to look into her eyes. They were beautiful eyes, blue and clear, but filled with a darkness that chilled my blood. Listen to me, Harrison, she hissed, her voice a low, terrifying growl. Tonight is the most important night of our lives. You are going to sit in your chair. You are going to smile. And you are going to keep your mouth shut. She squeezed harder. If you say one word about the basement, if you say one word about the money, if you try to signal anyone, I will bring you back here and I will cut your tongue out. Do you understand me? I will make sure you die screaming. I looked at her. I saw the fear behind the threat. She was terrified of losing her illusion. I nodded slowly, a jerky mechanical movement. Good, she said, releasing me. She turned to the mirror to check her lipstick. She looked stunning in a red gown bought with stolen funds. Lucas adjusted his cufflinks, looking every inch the successful executive. Let's go, Lucas said. The limo is waiting. They walked out the door, expecting me to shuffle behind them. I paused for a second in the hallway. I looked at myself in the large gilt-framed mirror by the door. The man looking back at me was gaunt. His skin was pale. The gray suit hung loosely on his frame, a testament to the starvation and the poison. He looked like a ghost. But then I looked at the eyes. They weren't the eyes of a victim. They weren't the eyes of a senile old man. They were burning with a cold blue fire. They were the eyes of a demolition expert watching the fuse burn down to the powder keg. I straightened my spine just an inch. I adjusted the knot of my tie. You built this house, I whispered to my reflection. Now tear it down. I walked out into the night, stepping into the back of the hired car. Lucas and Brittany toasted with champagne, celebrating their victory. I sat in the shadows, silent, clutching the button camera in my pocket, ready for the main event. The gala awaited. And I wasn't just a guest. I was the judgment. The grand ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton was a galaxy of crystal chandeliers and silk, a world away from the damp, moldy basement where I had spent the last 48 hours. The air smelled of expensive perfume roasting beef and the crisp, metallic scent of money. I sat in a rented wheelchair, my hands folded demurely in my lap, gripping the armrests so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I didn't need the chair. My legs were weak from the poison and the lack of food, but I could walk. Brittany and Lucas, however, insisted. The wheelchair was a prop. It completed the narrative they were selling to the world. It said, look at this frail old man, look how burdening he is, look how saintly we are for dragging him out. Brittany steered me through the crowd like I was a piece of luggage. She was wearing a crimson silk gown that plunged low in the back, a dress that cost $5,000 paid for, with funds embezzled from the foundation repair budget of a skyscraper. She walked with her chin high, a dazzling fake smile plastered on her face, greeting people she didn't know, with the confidence of a woman who believes she has already won the lottery. Lucas walked beside her, adjusting his cufflinks every 30 seconds. He looked handsome in his tuxedo, the very image of the rising corporate star. But I could see the sweat beading on his upper lip. I could see the way his eyes darted around the room, scanning for threats, scanning for anyone who might know the truth about the gambling debts or the stolen invoices. We are at table 4, near the front, Brittany whispered to him, her voice tight with excitement. That is the executive table, Lucas. We are sitting with the board members. This is it. We have arrived. She parked me next to a large potted palm tree in a dim corner near the service entrance, far away from their prestigious table. You stay here, Dad, Lucas said, patting my shoulder with a hand that felt clammy. You have a good view of the stage. We will come get you when the food is served. Don't try to move. You might tip the chair over. And don't talk to the waiters, Brittany hissed, leaning down so her diamond earrings brushed my cheek. If you make a scene, Harrison, I swear to God I will wheel you right out into the alley and leave you there. They turned their backs on me and dissolved into the crowd, laughing, shaking hands, playing the part of the power couple. I watched them go. I watched my son clap a senior vice president on the back. I watched my daughter-in-law tilt her head back and laugh at a joke made by the director of operations. They looked natural. They looked like they belonged. It was a terrifying realization that evil can wear such a polished face. I sat alone in the shadows, invisible to the waiters rushing past with trays of champagne. I felt like a ghost haunting my own life. But ghosts see everything. I scanned the room. I recognized faces. There were city council members I had argued zoning laws with in the 80s. There were developers I had partnered with on the lakeside expansion. Men and women who respected the name Harrison Bennett, Suddenly a man detached himself from a group near the bar and walked toward my corner. He squinted, peering into the shadows. My heart leaped. It was Gerald Fitzsimmons. We had served on the architectural review board together for 10 years. Gerald was a good man, a loud man, someone who didn't tolerate nonsense. Harrison Gerald called out, stepping closer, his face lighting up with surprise. Harrison Bennett, is that you? My God, I haven't seen you since the ribbon cutting at the library. I opened my mouth to speak, to say hello, to ask for help. But before I could make a sound, Lucas materialized out of nowhere. He must have been watching me like a hawk. He stepped between us, blocking Gerald's view of me. I am so sorry, Sir Lucas said, his voice dripping with polite, tragic apology. My father, he is not having a good day. Gerald looked confused. Lucas Little. Lucas, I didn't recognize you. Is he okay? I wanted to ask him about the sketches for the new marina. Lucas shook his head sadly, placing a hand on his chest. I wish he could answer you, Mr. Fitzsimmons. But the dementia, it has progressed very rapidly. He doesn't know where he is. He doesn't recognize anyone. Half the time he thinks he is still in the war. It is heartbreaking. I sat there frozen. The lie washed over me like ice water. Dementia. It was the perfect cage. Anything I said, any accusation I made would be dismissed as the ravings of a broken mind. Gerald's face fell. He looked over Lucas's shoulder at me, his eyes filled with profound pity. Oh, I had no idea. He looks so frail. I am so sorry, Lucas. He was a giant in this industry. A giant. He is still my dad, Lucas said, his voice breaking with a fake emotion that made me want to vomit. We are just trying to make his last days comfortable. Gerald nodded respectfully and backed away. Take care of him, son. I watched my old friend walk away, taking my credibility with him. I gripped the armrests until my hands shook. I wanted to scream. I wanted to stand up and shout that I could recite the structural load capacity of every beam in this hotel. I wanted to tell them that my mind was sharper than the knife my son had stabbed in my back. But I stayed silent. I remembered Brittany's threat. I remembered the basement. And I remembered the plan. I had to wait. Lucas turned back to me, his face losing the mask of the grieving son instantly. Close call, he muttered, wiping sweat from his forehead. Keep your mouth shut, old man. You are doing great. Just sit there and look pathetic. He walked back to the head table where Brittany was clinking glasses with the wife of the CFO. 10 minutes passed. The room began to quiet down. The lights dimmed, casting the ballroom into a soft golden twilight. The chatter subsided into a low hum of anticipation. Then the double doors at the back of the room swung open. The air in the room seemed to change pressure. Alexander Sterling walked in. He didn't just walk. He commanded the space. He was wearing a tuxedo that fit him like a second skin, midnight blue, impeccable. He moved with the easy, predatory grace of a man who owns the building, the ground it sits on, and the debt of everyone inside it. He walked down the center aisle, nodding to board members, shaking hands with key investors. He was smiling, but his eyes were cold, scanning the room with laser precision. Lucas and Brittany stood up as he approached their table. They looked like eager puppies waiting for a treat. Brittany smoothed her dress, practically vibrating with excitement. Lucas buttoned his jacket, puffing out his chest. Alexander stopped at their table. He shook Lucas's hand. He kissed Brittany's cheek. I saw him say something to them, something that made them beam with pride. Brittany pointed toward the stage and Alexander nodded. Then Alexander turned. He looked past the tables, past the waiters, past the potted palms. He looked directly into the dark corner where I sat in my wheelchair. Our eyes met across the crowded ballroom. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He simply raised his right eyebrow slightly and gave me a nearly imperceptible wink. It was a signal. It was the ignition spark. My heart rate slowed. The fear vanished. The humiliation of the wheelchair, the sting of the lies, the pain in my ribs, it all faded into the background. Alexander turned away from me and walked toward the stage. He stepped up to the podium, gripping the sides with both hands. The spotlight hit him, illuminating his face. He leaned into the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice booming through the speakers, deep and resonant. "Thank you for joining us tonight. We are here to celebrate excellence. We are here to celebrate the future of Sterling Dynamics. But before we look forward, we must look at the truth of where we stand today." He paused, letting the silence stretch out heavy and pregnant. "I have a very special presentation tonight," Alexander continued. "One that concerns the very foundation of integrity this company was built upon. And to help me present it, I would like to invite a rising star to the stage." He looked down at table 4. "Lucas Bennett, please join me." The room erupted in applause. Lucas stood up, his face flushed with triumph. He buttoned his jacket again. He looked at Brittany, who blew him a kiss. He looked like he was floating. He walked up the stairs to the stage, basking in the adoration of his peers. He shook Alexander's hand. He stood next to the CEO, looking out at the crowd, looking out at the world he thought he had conquered. I sat in my wheelchair, my hands unclenched. I smoothed the fabric of my old suit. "Enjoy the view, son," I whispered into the darkness. "It is a long way down." Lucas stood center stage, bathed in the spotlight. A smile of arrogant victory plastered across his face as the applause died down. He reached out to accept the microphone Alexander was offering, ready to give the acceptance speech he had likely rehearsed in the mirror a dozen times. But Alexander pulled the microphone back just an inch, his expression shifting from professional warmth to something glacial. "Before you accept this position," Lucas Alexander said, his voice echoing through the silent ballroom, "I think it is important for everyone here to understand the true nature of your recent contributions to Sterling Dynamics. We value transparency above all else, and thanks to a very reliable source, we have a uniquely transparent view into your operations." Alexander gestured to the massive projection screen behind them, which had been displaying the company logo. The image flickered and cut to black. A static hiss filled the room, followed by a grainy high-definition video feed. The ballroom gasped as one. On the screen, magnified to 20 feet tall, was the interior of Lucas's home office. The date stamp in the corner read "Yesterday." The audio was crystal clear. "Do it, you coward!" Brittany's voice screamed from the speakers, distorted by rage, but unmistakable. On screen, Brittany grabbed Lucas by the hair and slammed his face toward the monitor. The audience watched in horrified silence as my son, the man currently standing on stage in a tuxedo, typed with shaking hands. "It is done," the on-screen Lucas whispered. I transferred the funds to the Shell account. $350,000 from the Foundation reinforcement budget. Lucas, standing on stage, turned white as a sheet. He staggered back, looking from the screen to Alexander, his mouth opening and closing, like a fish on dry land. "If they don't catch it, the building could be compromised in a decade," the recording continued. "But we will have the money by tomorrow." The video cut to a second clip. This one was darker, grainier. It was the basement. The camera angle was low, hidden in the shadows. It showed Brittany standing over a frail old man lying on a mattress. It showed her leg pulling back. It showed her kicking me in the ribs. "Why won't you just die?" the recorded Brittany shrieked. "Why won't you just let us have the money?" The screen went black. The silence in the Ritz-Carlton ballroom was absolute. You could hear a pin drop. Hundreds of eyes turned from the screen to the man on stage and then to the woman in the red dress at table 4. Lucas Alexander said, his voice calm and deadly loud in the quiet room. "You are not being promoted. You are being terminated effective immediately for cause. And you are being indicted for corporate embezzlement, fraud, and endangerment of public safety." As if on cue, the side doors of the ballroom burst open. 4 officers from the Chicago Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit marched in their badges, catching the light. Lucas's knees buckled. He grabbed the podium to stay upright. "No," he wheezed. "No, that is out of context. That is a deepfake." Brittany stood up at her table, knocking over her chair. She looked like a trapped animal. She pointed a shaking finger at the screen. "That is a lie. That old man is senile. He is crazy." "We were taking care of him." Alexander looked down at her from the stage. "We have the toxicology reports, Brittany. We know about the arsenic. We know about the forgery. It is over." Brittany looked around the room, seeing the walls closing in. She saw the police moving toward the stage to grab her husband. She saw the socialite wives looking at her with disgust. She played her last card. She screamed, her voice shrill and desperate. "You can't do this to us. We have rights. We have assets. At least we still have our house. That house is in my husband's name. You can't take our home." I decided it was time. I released my death grip on the armrests of the wheelchair. I took a deep breath, ignoring the ache in my poisoned muscles, and I pushed myself up. A ripple of murmurs went through the crowd near me. Gerald Fitzsimmons, who was standing nearby holding a drink, dropped his glass. It shattered on the floor. "Harrison," he whispered. I didn't look at him. I kept my eyes fixed on the stage. I took a step, then another. I wasn't the shuffling, broken man they had dragged out of the basement. I walked with the stride of a man who had walked steel girders 50 stories in the air. I straightened my back. I adjusted the cuffs of my oversized suit. I walked past Brittany. She stopped screaming. She stared at me, her eyes bulging as if she were seeing a corpse rise from the grave. I walked to the stairs of the stage. The police officers paused, sensing the moment. Alexander stepped back, offering me the microphone with a respectful nod. I took it. I looked out at the sea of faces, and then I turned to look at my son. He was trembling, tears streaming down his face, looking at me with a mixture of terror and confusion. I turned to Brittany. "No," I said, my voice booming through the sound system, rich and steady, without a trace of the dementia they had claimed I had. "You don't have a home, Brittany. You don't have anything." "What? What are you doing?" Lucas whispered. "Dad," I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket. I pulled out the document Sarah had prepared for me hours ago. I unfolded it slowly. "This morning at 9 a.m., I said, holding the paper up to the light, a holding company purchased the mortgage note for the property at 42 Willow Creek Lane. The bank was very happy to unload the toxic debt you haven't paid in 4 months." Brittany went pale. You bought our mortgage? With what money? You are broke. You are a pensioner." "I am the sole creditor." I continued, ignoring her. "And as the holder of the note, and in light of the default, I am exercising my right to accelerate the loan. The full balance of $1.2 million is due immediately." I looked at Lucas. "Can you pay me, son? Can you write a check right now?" Lucas shook his head, sobbing. "No. No." Then I said, my voice hardening into concrete, "I am declaring foreclosure. The property is seized. You have 24 hours to vacate my premises." The room erupted in whispers. Brittany looked like she was going to faint. But how? "You don't have that kind of money. You are nobody." From the shadows of the wings, Sarah Jenkins stepped forward. She was impeccable in a black suit, carrying a leather portfolio. She walked to the microphone, standing beside me. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice sharp and professional. "For the record, my client is not nobody. He is Harrison Bennett, the founder and sole director of Bennett Holdings." She opened the portfolio and held up a balance sheet. "Mr. Bennett owns 3 commercial skyscrapers in the Loop. He holds a diversified portfolio of securities. His current net worth is valued in excess of $15 million. The number hung in the air like a thunderclap. $15 million. Lucas looked at me. His eyes were wide, bottomless pits of shock. 15 million you. But the basement, the old clothes. Why I looked at him, and for the first time I let the pain show on my face. Because I wanted you to build your own life, Lucas. I wanted you to be a man, not a trust fund baby. I hid it to protect you from becoming exactly what you are standing here today, a thief who would poison his own father for a payout. Lucas fell to his knees. It wasn't a figure of speech. His legs simply gave out. He collapsed on the stage, burying his face in his hands. A howl of pure, agonizing regret tore from his throat. I could have had it all, he sobbed into the floor. I could have just asked. I could have just been a good son. Yes, I said softly, looking down at him. You could have. You didn't need to steal. You didn't need to kill. You just needed to be decent. I turned my back on him. It was the hardest thing I have ever done, but I turned my back. Officers, Alexander said. Please remove them. The police moved in. 2 officers grabbed Lucas, hauling him up from the floor. He didn't fight. He was a broken shell. They cuffed his hands behind his back. 2 other officers approached Brittany. She tried to run, scrambling toward the exit, but they caught her easily. As the handcuffs clicked around her wrists, she screamed a feral, ugly sound of a woman who had lost her soul and her prize in the same night. I stood on the stage watching them be dragged away. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel joy. I felt a heavy, somber peace. The cancer was cut out. The building was demolished. Now finally, I could clear the rubble. The heavy steel door of the interrogation room slid open with a mechanical hiss that echoed the finality of a coffin lid closing. I walked in my steps, slow and deliberate, on the linoleum floor. The room was stark, smelling of industrial cleaner and stale coffee, a sharp contrast to the perfumed air of the Ritz-Carlton ballroom, where I had last seen my son. Lucas sat at a metal table, his hands cuffed to a steel ring bolted to the surface. He was still wearing his tuxedo from the gala, but it was ruined now. The collar was unbuttoned, the tie was missing, and the expensive fabric was wrinkled and stained with sweat. He looked up when I entered. His eyes were red, swollen from hours of crying. When he saw me, he didn't look like a man of 40. He looked like a terrified child who had broken a window and was waiting for the punishment. "Dad," he choked out, lunging forward as far as the chains would allow. "Thank God. You came. You have to help me. You have to tell them it was a mistake." I pulled out the metal chair opposite him and sat down. I didn't say a word. I just looked at him. I looked at the face that used to smile at me over birthday cakes, the face I had watched sleep in a crib, the face I had been so proud of. Now I just saw a stranger. It was Brittany. Lucas babbled, the words spilling out of him in a desperate torrent. "She made me do it, Dad. She is the one who wanted the money. She is the one who found the loan sharks. I tried to stop her. I told her it was wrong. She threatened to leave me. She manipulated me. You know how she is. She is crazy. I listened to him throwing his wife to the wolves, the same woman he had conspired with to kill me just 24 hours ago. It was pathetic. It was the final confirmation that there was no spine left in him, no moral core to salvage." "Stop," I said. The word wasn't loud, but it cut through his panic like a blade. Lucas froze, his mouth hanging open. "I don't want to hear her name," I said, my voice steady and cold. "And I don't want to hear your excuses. But Dad," he whined, tears leaking from his eyes, "I am your son. You can't let me go to prison. I am scared." I leaned forward, placing my hands flat on the table. "You are 40 years old, Lucas. You are not a child. You are a man who made choices. When Brittany kicked me, you watched. When she starved me, you watched. When she told you to poison my soup, you didn't pour it down the sink. You brought it to me. You handed me the cup. You looked me in the eye and told me to drink it. Lucas flinched as if I had slapped him. That wasn't Brittany, and I continued, my voice rising just slightly. That was you. That was your hand. That was your choice, that you chose greed over your father. You chose a lifestyle over a life. And now you have chosen this cell. I stood up. I had seen what I needed to see. There was no remorse in him, only regret that he had been caught. Dad, wait. Where are you going? Please. I walked to the door and knocked on the glass. The guard opened it immediately. I am going to live my life, Lucas, I said without turning back. Something you should have done a long time ago. Goodbye. The door closed, muffling his screams. As I walked down the long fluorescent-lit hallway of the precinct, I didn't feel the crushing weight of grief I expected. I felt lighter. The burden of carrying him, of protecting him from his own weakness, was finally gone. The wheels of justice turned, quickly greased by the mountains of evidence Sarah and Alexander had compiled. The plea bargains were rejected. The trial was short. The jury didn't need long to deliberate after seeing the video of the abuse. Lucas and Brittany were both sentenced to 5 years in federal prison for embezzlement, elder abuse, and attempted fraud. It was a mercy, really. It gave them time. Time to sit in a cell and think about the $50 vase that cost them everything. There was a child involved, a nephew on Brittany's side who had been staying with them occasionally, a boy I had barely met. The state was going to put him in foster care. I intervened. I didn't take him in, I was too old to raise a child again. But I set up a trust. I paid for a tuition at a top-tier boarding school in New England, a place that taught character and integrity. I gave him a chance to break the cycle, a chance Lucas had squandered. It was the last check I would ever write for that branch of the family. Then I went back to the house. It was empty now. The police tape had been removed. I walked through the rooms listening to the echoes of the past. I walked into the kitchen where I had been dragged. I walked down to the basement. I looked at the lumpy mattress. I looked at the vent where I had hidden the watches. I didn't feel nostalgia. I felt like I was standing in a graveyard. I called a real estate agent the next morning. I put the house on the market for 20% below value for a cash buyer. I wanted it gone. I wanted the physical structure of my trauma erased from the earth. When the check for the sale came through, adding to the millions I already had, I didn't put it in the bank. I called the dean of the University of Chicago's School of Architecture. I established the Harrison Bennett Scholarship for underprivileged students. Full rides for kids who had the talent, but not the means. Kids who knew the value of $1. Kids who would build things that lasted. That was my legacy now. Not a son, but a future generation of builders. 6 months later, the winter had turned to spring. The snow that had almost been my shroud was gone, replaced by the green shoots of new life. I sat on the balcony of my new penthouse on the 42nd floor overlooking the Chicago River. The wind up here was fresh and clean. The city lights twinkled below like a sea of diamonds. I was wearing a new suit, one that fit perfectly. My health had returned, the poison flushed from my system, my strength rebuilt by good food and peace of mind. The glass door slid open behind me. "Refill," Alexander asked, holding a bottle of vintage Bordeaux. "Please," I said, holding out my glass. He poured the wine, the rich red liquid swirling in the crystal. Martha stepped out onto the balcony, wrapped in a shawl, looking elegant and serene. She sat in the chair next to me, patting my hand. "It is a beautiful view, Harrison," she said softly. "It is." I agreed. We sat there in comfortable silence, 3 people who had weathered storms and come out the other side. Alexander the Titan, who protected his own. Martha, the quiet observer, who saved a life. And me. I took a sip of the wine. It tasted of oak and berries, complex and deep. I looked down at the city I had helped build. Somewhere down there, in a cold cell, my son was sleeping on a cot. I felt a pang of sadness, a ghost of the love I once had, but it passed quickly, carried away by the wind. I had lost a son, yes. It was a tragedy that would leave a scar on my heart forever. But in the process of losing him, I had found something I thought I had lost decades ago. I had found Harrison Bennett again. I realized then, looking at the skyline, that dignity isn't something you are given. It isn't something you can buy with $15 million. It isn't determined by the house you live in or the car you drive. True dignity is what happens when you are shoved face down into the mud, when you are stripped of everything, when you are freezing in the snow, and you decide to stand up. It is the refusal to be a victim. It is the courage to walk back through the door that was slammed in your face and demand justice. I swirled the wine in my glass, watching the light catch the liquid. To new foundations, I whispered to the wind. Martha and Alexander raised their glasses. To new foundations, they echoed. I drank, I smiled, and for the first time in a very long time, I was truly, completely home. My story is painful proof that blind sacrifice is not love. It is enabling. I spent a lifetime building skyscrapers but forgot to build boundaries with my own son. True dignity is not found in a $15 million portfolio, but in the moment you dare to stand up after being trampled. Never let the title of family become a shield for abuse. Sometimes letting go of toxic people, even if they share your blood, is the only way to find yourself again. I lost a son, but I regained my self-respect, and that is a price worth paying. If this journey of reclaiming justice touched your heart, please hit the like button and subscribe right now so you don't miss the next story. Do you think the punishment for Lucas and Brittany was deserved? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you for listening.